Welcome back, everybody. Good to have you here. Today, we're going to be talking about supplements, the good, the bad, and the unregulated, as they are in this country. Supplement industry's exploded. There's been
hmm
a very big, push from a lot of like doctors, practitioners. We want to, talk a little bit about that because it can be complex and sometimes unsettling between like regulatory gaps, practitioners who have conflicts of interest, and also like
hmm
certain formulations or combinations of formulations that, are unproven.
hmm
As many of you have probably seen, observed, heard, the global supplement industry has exploded. It's a multi-billion dollar empire. And it promises everything, right? Better health, better minds, stronger bodies, longer lives. But it's complex and it can be unsettling because there's a lot of regulatory gaps. Sometimes there are conflicts of interest with practitioners, and sometimes formulas and combinations of formulas that are unproven. So you end up spending a lot of money and getting very little return. So today, Judy and I are going to be talking a little bit about that. And for those of you that are new, I'm Therese Nadler, registered dietitian out of Annapolis, Maryland, from Nadler Nutrition. And I have Judy Converse here out of Boulder, Colorado. She's been in practice, I think, 30 years. So she's always got
Something like
amazing
that.
insight and input to share. But we're both registered dietitians, so we love to look at things from the science perspective and sort of dig through it, debunk it, and figure out, what the best recommendation may be, or also just provide tips on, how to navigate some of these things that are a little more complex, or a little bit like landmines. So
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Therese. This is a really fun topic. I think it's a fun topic. And yeah, it's a big story. I also love to make a plug for you and I both having a graduate credential in public health nutrition, because what does that mean? So it's not just you become a clinician, which we have, and I spent 25 years as a clinician working one-on-one. But the cool thing about public health nutrition is you're studying and understanding nutritional epidemiology. So that's how does nutrition function on a population scale, right? And understanding the statistics that express that, understanding population health indices, things that we talked about before, like infant mortality, maternal mortality, or lifespan, or all kinds of things like that. So supplements are playing a big role there. And what's so interesting is I just was glancing at a screen on some data showing that during COVID, pharmaceutical sales took a little dip, of course, because people stopped going to the doctor. Supplement sales did not. And people could get them and people could use them. I think people were interested in not getting COVID and taking
right.
extra things like zinc or vitamin C or vitamin D and some of these things that did get reviewed kind of in the aftermath, and like, yes, these nutrients are useful for your immune system. So it's a huge topic. And I kind of come from a perspective of having used them as a practitioner. And how do you do that? And with kids specifically, right? So in my practice, it was all infants, toddlers, children, teens, whatever. So where do we go with that? One of my challenges in practice was, well, two things. When parents would come into practice, usually, not always, but quite often, they would already be using some supplements,
Same.
and they would not be doing it in an effective way because, how are they supposed to know, right? What are they?
Right. You
They're
just go
not
to, yeah, you go to the market,
practitioners.
you pick up the brand that's at the market, and you think you're doing like your child, like this is what you should be doing. But like, is the potency correct? Is the efficacy there? Does it have the right ingredients? I agree with you 100%.
Right. Some of them would be just pell-mell, willy-nilly trying things, but spending money, but not really getting the effect. So we would work with that, and then we'd get very targeted on what will work for this child, and that would be based on a very thorough nutrition assessment. We've talked about that before. That would, for kids, always involve looking at a food diary and make parents fill them out. I have a little way for them to do that. There's apps for that. If you want to look at that, they can break down nutrients for your kids. And that's another angle too. It's like, is the food supply as nourishing as it was decades ago? No.
There's
No,
no,
our
right.
soils are depleted. So there's all this rationale out there of why people are starting to reach for these things and try to shore up what's missing. So yeah, basing that on what do you give a child, nutrition assessment, and then that would look at growth pattern, what they eat, if there's labs, signs and symptoms, what's the history in the family, who's making, what do they eat? So a lot of components would go into a decision to give a child a supplement. I would never, I want to tell listeners and parents right now, any provider who just hands you a supplement without a rationale, I'm not a fan. There
Yeah.
needs to
There
be,
has to,
just
it has to
like
tie
your,
back. Right.
yeah, your pediatrician shouldn't hand you a drug for just a shrug. Like, well, your child's presenting with some ADD features. Try the Adderall or try this. I mean, that does kind of happen though.
It
But
does a lot. Yeah.
yeah, and we talked about that in other episodes where there's a lot of nutrition components of attention that you can fix and you don't need a medication.
Right.
But
And if your system is awry, sometimes these drugs overstimulate, and then you end up with kids who have a horrible reaction to some of these
right.
drugs, right? So
Right.
that's the
Yeah,
other part
so
of this. Yeah.
right, no wonder parents are reaching. I would get a lot of parents coming in already using the supplement. Once in a while, I'd get parents coming in using a lot of supplements. And
Mm.
it was way too much. And we're talking 60 pills a day
Oof.
for
Wow.
a 7-year-old, and the parent is opening the capsules, or maybe they've taught the child to swallow pills. So that's just untenable. That's just like
Right.
functionally untenable. And then you got to wonder, well, what are all these pills doing with each other?
And right, you're also discounting the fact that like there's a lot of compounds in foods, particularly plants, many things that we have not even discovered that are beneficial. So it's, supplements are interesting because it's usually an isolated single ingredient. Sometimes there's a combo in there for, to help with activation of an ingredient, but the whole plant or the whole food product has a lot of nutrition in it that is, we know some of it, probably not all of it. Phytochemicals were just discovered really in the 90s. I'm sure there will be other compounds that, we will discover as the years and decades go on. So I do think as dietitians, supplements can be a stopgap and they can help get you to a better place initially, especially if you have, I think, picky eaters or kids that are struggling in different ways. But I think the goal is always the food.
Exactly. I would always start with food, giving kids enough food and macros they need, macros they can use, nutrients they can use. So yeah, there's synergy in food and in plants and herbs as well. And there's using just micronutrients. Like when I say micronutrients, that's like your vitamins and minerals and
Right,
sprinkling them into a supplement. And they work in conjunction with food in the body.
right,
Supplements also blend these with all kinds of herbs. So we've now got nutraceuticals are using nutrients in like a pharmaceutical dose. And there's definitely a place for that. There is a place for that with children as well. An example a lot of people have heard of is methylation impairments. If you have
right.
a genetic difference, which is very common, that you are not very good at methylating, which is one of the biochemical pathways we need to detoxify things and to also balance mood.
Activate certain
Right,
vitamins, right? Get them into
right.
active forms that the body can use in certain pathways.
Right, and it helps balance our neurotransmitter chemistry. So people who have methylation impairments tend to lean more toward allergies, anxiety, and a whole bunch of other challenging conditions. So yes, those are people who might need more methyl B12 or methylfolate and not use a folic acid. So there's practitioner can help you with that.
Supplements, especially in this country, supplements are pretty heavily unregulated in general,
Right. There's a lot of
So
leeway.
you can
Um,
order whatever you want. You think your kid needs this, you can order kind of any dose you want. You can get it, without a problem. And I think something to flag here is that other countries do not operate the same way.
Yeah. And I will say this. So I was just trying to get familiar. There's been a lot of regulatory steps over the last 30 years. I mean, I can do a little screen share timeline of dietary supplement regulations in the US going all the way back to 1915 and regulations going up into 2023.
Yeah.
So there's been efforts to get at it. Of course, the Food and Drug Administration basically can't regulate supplements very well. I mean, there is legislation, there have been efforts, but the FDA does require make very stringent requirements around what actually goes on a label for a
Yep,
supplement.
labels are strict for sure.
They're very strict, and what you can say about a supplement, what your claims are, they do
Yep.
regulate that, and they do kind of slam it. Manufacturers do get slammed if they step out of bounds. They don't, though, really regulate and they kind of can't because it's just the volume is just too huge.
Correct.
Supplements don't need pre-approval before, like a drug, right? A
Right.
drug
So
has,
supplements are not regulated like drugs, that are
right,
distributed from a pharmacy. And I think what you're getting at is manufacturers do not need to prove safety really or efficacy before selling a
right.
product.
They,
You just got to
well,
be careful about
they,
your claims. You can't go too overboard with your claims because then they will come for you.
yes,
Um,
I think they do. There is a safety, but it's not super robust. And when was that?
Labeling and
2007. Yeah, Good Manufacturing Practices was issued by the FDA in 2007. But what consumers, parents might want to know, or people using supplements, is a lot of companies do their own third. They are more stringent than the GMP, the Good Manufacturing. So you might look for that on the label, that they have
yep.
an independent third-party lab testing their product. That makes a product more expensive. And
Right.
that's another challenge. So you're at the supermarket and you're picking up I won't call out brands, but something sitting on the shelf at the supermarket may or may not have as stringent a testing as something that a supplement company only wants you to be able to buy through a provider. Because they
Right.
want it to work. They don't want to have a safety situation on their hands, and they want their product to perform well. So
Yeah.
there's higher standards that can go, but that falls on the manufacturer if they want to do that.
Yeah. And I do think as a practitioner, I certainly recommend certain brands. I think certain brands based on years of experience, the third party testing, and just the efficacy that I have seen, professionally and personally, there are certain brands that I will always gravitate to because I feel good about recommending those brands. I know you're going to get a good product. And I think these are some of the brands that are not in the supermarket, right? These are some of the brands that like only people in sort of the medical world are aware of. So
Right. There's a whole bunch, there's hundreds and hundreds of brands that you probably can find on Amazon. They're not supposed to be sold there because the manufacturer makes people sign a contract saying I'm a licensed healthcare provider, and yeah, here's a copy of my license. I've had to do that many times over the years. And they don't want these products sold just willy-nilly on the internet, but that does happen. That
it
does
does.
happen.
And a word of caution, because I know for a lot of people, when you buy supplements, Amazon is very easy and you have Prime. And so you just put it in your cart and it shows up within 24 hours.
Right.
But there's a lot of, I think, handling problems. If you've ever gotten supplements from Amazon that are clumped together or goopy, right? That means they sat in a hot warehouse on a hot truck, they were not handled correctly. So the efficacy is probably diminished in some form. There's also some concern about counterfeit with Amazon, with the rise of 3D printers and people being able to copy some of these brands that are highly regarded. They basically get capsules, fill them with rice powder, and pretend you've paid $80 and pretend you're getting this thing that's really just a useless capsule. So I do think
Right.
there is some caution around. You want to buy from a reputable source.
Yes.
I think that's important.
Right. Yeah, and the reputable sources will be your integrative or functional medicine providers, people
Right.
who are a naturopath or an integrative physician or something like that, and people with experience using them too. And so another thing about the FDA, one thing they will also do, like we said, you can't make claims that go out of bounds. You can't say it cures anything on a label. You can't really even say it treats. You can't use the word treat. And in fact, dietitians, if you've run into this too, Therese, for our license and our registration status, I am very cautious across all my decades. I never said the word treat. I don't treat anything because that's
No,
something
got a
only a
scope.
physician, yeah, physicians are licensed to treat. Nutritionists, dietitians are licensed to support. So we can give you supportive supplements and things like that. So the FDA does not allow that language that steps into that treatment zone. Another thing that they'll do, and this is the industry is I will say this, the pharmaceutical industry is very interested in all this because of course it's a competitor for them.
And it's a
They
billion-dollar industry.
it's a big, well, pharma industry is a lot bigger. It's
But
a
but
lot.
but this would be a good one to potentially, get your
They
fingers
would
into,
love to own
yeah.
it. They would
Yeah.
love to own it for sure. So one of the things they've begun doing is analyzing different products to see if there's anything in them that resemble a medication or the action of a drug or chemically resemble a drug. And they will stop a manufacturer from producing that if it resembles a component of a drug. And I think the only example that comes to mind, and this does not relate to children, is for Viagra. There was a product that claimed to work as well as Viagra, and when it was analyzed by the makers of Viagra, which I think is Pfizer, and that's a multi-hundred-million-dollar drug for them, there was one component in it that they successfully claimed to the FDA, this looks like a component inside our Viagra, so you have to stop selling it to people. It's too much like a drug. And we don't want people buying this themselves,
Right.
which was and they succeeded in that, which was disingenuous because they did direct marketing to guys for Viagra themselves without a
Right.
physician in the loop. So,
Mm.
it's right now it's a fierce, fierce fist fight, I think, for
Well, and
supplements and who's going to own which parts of this.
yeah, and I think, I mean, it's interesting because this is like what goes on in the US, but if you look at like Canada, Germany, Australia, they have much stricter standards. They're classified in a certain way where, you have to get pre-market licensing, you have to prove evidence of efficacy, there's quality control audits. It's just a far more regulated industry in those countries. And also misleading health claims are pretty aggressively penalized. So I think it keeps people in their lanes, right, without going egregiously in one direction or another, to be make people understand like legitimately what they can expect by taking this. And I know
Yeah.
you've said like you've had international clients who are like desperate to get their hands on certain things that you can easily get here, but you cannot get in other countries.
Right. I did. Yes, I've had many clients in other countries that would have a family member or some connection to the United States, and they'd
Right.
managed to get, and things we take for granted, like a higher potency probiotic or
Right.
melatonin, or, simple things that we do take for granted. Melatonin's an interesting example too. There's this, we talked a little bit about this, I think, Therese, before. There was a news blip, I think last year, saying, "Oh my gosh, melatonin, there's thousands of emergency room visits for children. They're all going to the ER because they eat melatonin." And I really went down the rabbit hole because I use that a lot in my practice in 25 odd years, and I would use it in kids who really had very disruptive sleep profiles, if you will. They could not sleep, could not fall asleep, could not stay asleep. And if you can imagine, we all know what it's like to have a newborn, but let's say that's been your kid for 7 years.
Oh, so hard.
No one in your house is well. No one is sleeping. People are frayed, right? So they're just frayed, coming apart. It's very hard. No one can function. So what's wrong with a 0.5 milligram dose of melatonin for a 60-pound kid? Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
It's also
So,
a substance the body makes, right? Like, I mean,
right,
the
it's
other
a
piece of this
hormone.
is not right. This is not something that like is so far into the human body. It's just there's some dysregulation going on in this child that you're, using as an example that like this substance is not being made well enough or it's, getting damaged in some form where it's not working for the child. So, right.
Right. And, in looking and doing a nutrition assessment and looking at their diets and their digestion and all these different things, like it would usually become evident why their sleep architecture was so disrupted. They didn't have good protein intakes, or they didn't have good protein and digestion. That's going to be derived from protein in your diet. You're going to break down that into the amino acids you need to make something like melatonin or other parts of your daily rhythms. And these kids just weren't doing that. And there's been nice clinical data on clinical trials on kids using melatonin if they have autism, who are kids who often have sleep problems.
Yeah.
Much bigger doses, 9 milligrams was tested in kids who are school age, and it worked really well. There were no side effects. I'll mention the only thing that you would need to think about using melatonin in a child is that they can't be using drugs that affect that serotonin pathway, SSRIs or medications for that, because those can interact. But when I looked into the news reports about all this kind of yelling about melatonin, what I learned was, first of all, what had actually happened was some children would eat those melatonin gummies which is an example of something you can buy at the supermarket, right? And they would find them and think they were candy and
Mm.
eat the bottle.
OD, right? Yeah, too
And
much.
that's a big no-no. And all my years, one form of supplements I did not ever like giving children was a gummy, because that's
Also
going to
bad for the
happen. That's
also
going to
bad
happen.
for the teeth, right? I'm sure your pediatric dentists out there will agree.
Right. Well, and there
Yeah,
would
it's
usually
like
be
candy.
much more sugar in those than
Right,
anything else.
right, for sure.
So, and then the numbers that they had reported for these emergency room visits had clearly been conflated when I went down all the way to the bottom of the rabbit hole to find out where they got those numbers. They weren't corroborated. The CDC kind of backpedaled and said, well, this isn't really a study. So I was like, okay, we don't need to throw out the baby with the bathwater. If you need to use a supplement like that, you can. It's safe, and talk to your provider about it.
Yeah, I'm with you on the gummies, and it's hard because they're very pervasive for children. And it is, you'd be surprised. Like kids can actually learn to swallow real vitamins. They can,
Yeah.
like, at five
Yeah.
or six. This is, I know it sounds to some people like, oh my God, that's crazy. I would never even think that.
They
But
can. I've
they
had
can
kids
do
as
it.
young as four,
Yeah,
3 or 4 swallow capsules, and a lot of capsules in the whole professional provider supplement industry. They'll make capsules that are really tiny. There's a super tiny size for little kids to learn to swallow if they have to. And
yeah,
the advantage there is they're not in these really sugary suspensions. So a lot of the products that are made for kids, like we just said, even if they're not gummies, they're powders, liquids,
or
lots of,
tablets.
yeah,
Also, even today, like, because parents are aware, like, you don't want to give your kid like all this sugar, especially first thing in the morning. But then they use artificial sweeteners. So then, you know what I mean? So there's sucralose in a lot of these things, which is also not good for young children, just chemicals you don't want them having. And also it messes up gut bacteria.
right.
Um, so I'm with you. It's tough. You want, I think it's a sweet spot, right? You want it palatable so the kid will take it, but the forms are challenging.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about giving supplements to kids. If you are, I think we kind of land on the same page in that you really should have some guidance. If you're just taking a multivitamin every whatever, okay, fine. But if your kid has a chronic condition, or you're trying to actually make a dent in a symptom that's persisting, yes, there's tons of supplements that might be worthy. But
Right.
again, you really work with someone who's done that with kids before. Or
Yeah.
at the very least, talk to your mom universe, get some input.
Friends. Yeah.
There were moms that I also worked with who just were super detectives and clearly knew a lot more about these things than their doctors, and successfully gave their kids certain supplements. Taught me a lot of new things that I hadn't learned and could read up on and study more on the research end of it. So yes, there's things you can do. You can really turn chronic issues around for kids.
For sure.
And I guess one of the things I would say is, please don't don't do's and don'ts. Okay. Forget the gummies, right? We're off the gummies. It is dangerous because they are like candy, and that can be dangerous. Number two, please don't give your kid, the 60 pills a day. I mean, no way. You're gonna have to cull that down. I've met so many kids in that situation, and it does turn into kind of a an income stream for your provider to keep selling you stuff and selling you stuff. So no, if I do ever need to give kids a few things in a day, I will only do it like twice. There's some in the morning, and there's some that might be at bedtime or dinner. That's it. We're not going to be chasing kids
All
all
day
day
long.
with pills.
Yeah. And I think, Judy, your point about practitioners getting kickbacks or affiliate commissions or, buying things wholesale and then marking them up for, money to bring in. I mean,
Right.
that it does go on.
Oh,
Um,
for sure. That your providers will definitely make money from that. Not necessarily the a bad thing. I mean, their expertise is valuable in how to use these, and better that than going to Amazon and plunking around and hit
right.
or miss, and maybe getting something counterfeit or expired or whatever. I was always kind of a cheapskate with these things with my families, kind of like, look, I've been there as a mom. And
Yeah.
even though I can buy supplements, I have had over the years accounts with different supplement providers. I mean, that stuff's expensive. really
So
expensive.
expensive. Yeah.
So it can really add up. And okay, yeah, judicious use is what I think I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, for sure. And I think in a lot of ways, like you run some tests, you figure out if there are deficiencies, like if there's certain markers that are, low, high, trending low, trending high, right? So that's the other piece is a lot of, I think what you and I both do is you look at ideal ranges, not just like big generic, traditional conventional ranges for like optimal performance. It's usually a tighter range than what you'll see in like a LabCorp or a Quest, report. But when you do those tests, you're able to really figure out like, okay, this is high, this is low. Let's back into what could be the problem or what's not happening that should be happening or where the kink in the machinery is and, boost it. And you can do that through supplements. I think the other piece of this that we have not talked about because this is supplements, but there is I think, a predisposition, particularly in America, to like add more and more and more. And sometimes the biggest needle movers are what you take away by changing diet. You're removing gluten, removing casein, dairy, so that's also something to keep in mind. And I think it's really a practitioner that would be able to help steer you in that direction because sometimes it's not always more. Sometimes it's actually less. And when you take out something, that can also be that can make a big change.
Yeah, that's so true. I would often encourage families if they'd come in and we get started working together to go on a supplement holiday, I'd call it. And they might come in with a ton of supplements and I would just be like, look, let's just take it away and see where the baseline lands. Where does your kid land functionally? And yes, we can do some different lab tests, whatever. But I was always most helped and informed by looking at the kid. Let's look at the kid. Kids are really good. They're little canaries in the coal mine. They are fast with exhibiting clinical signs and symptoms, quite often faster than adults.
Yep.
So you can see these deficits. And one of the things that I put up on my site years ago was called the sensory nutrition checklist. And it was sort of a checklist of clinical signs. And that it would relate to, well, you might look at whether you have a zinc a deficit or an iron deficit or magnesium deficit, or you might have a fungal overgrowth, or this is a sign of a heavy metal toxicity, or this is a sign of a food sensitivity, not an allergy. So you can kind of work through these things with your kid. And again, with a knowledgeable provider too, who's got experience using these things in kids. Another don't that I want to say is I've met lots of families, they come in with supplements and they've been given the provider gave supplements in the adult doses,
That's a big
which was like, what?
one. Right.
What? No, I mean, once in a while, yes, I would say not typical. I would have kids who did very well on an adult dose for a very specific problem of a specific supplement, but giving too much and just pushing that river in your kid's body, it usually can make them sicker. They might feel sicker, worse, more tired, more crabby, more
Yeah. Oh,
reactive.
irritability, big one. Yeah, headaches sometimes. Like for it's. I mean, kids should not really get headaches. You know what I
Right?
mean? Like,
Right.
if your kid is constantly like have a headache or holding their head, like sometimes they can't verbalize what they're feeling. Those to me are some of the signs that are, there's something going on. Some of the pathways that are a little off. Whether it's driven by supplements or it's just like a sluggish system, right? And you need to figure out like what is creating some of that and how do we fix
Right.
it?
Right.
But it's yeah, I mean supplements are it's the adult dose thing is real. And especially I will say this, I think some people like are aware of functional medicine and so you'll go see a doctor who traditionally like treats adults. And
Right.
so I think sometimes they just either I don't know if they forget they're treating a child or if they just aren't like sure how to dose down because there's an actual specific like formula that you use to help dose down for kids based on weight and height and age and all these different things. So that is important too, for
I
sure.
think you're right. I think they do kind of forget that they're working with kids, or they assume that the kids have the the functionality of an adult around detoxification, and that
Right.
isn't a given. That is not a
Yeah.
given.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would start again. I would be very conservative, almost to a fault.
Right,
a
it's
lot of
slow. Right. And that's what also I tell people when I work with them. I'm like, look, I understand a lot of people want an immediate turnaround, right? They spend all this money, they spent money on supplements. They're like, is this really going to work? Like, how long before we see results? And often it's just you got to wait and see. It's a lot of detective work, right? It's like, here's what I think the problem is. Here's how I think we can help it. This is what I'm going to recommend. Do this. When I work with people, it's like, do this supplement, do it for a week by itself. Then if that's working, child's doing well, you haven't seen any negative, consequences like headaches, irritability, moodiness, any of that stuff we talked about, then I'm like, let's try this one. You know what I mean? And then you have, but so you're layering it in a very controlled way over time so that if for some reason that child does not respond well or does not react well, you can pinpoint what it was. You
exactly.
start with, like to your point, 30 a day, it gets very hard to know, well, what was the needle mover? Like which one changed that behavior and which one caused this, feeling. So,
Right. You cannot know. That's really a really good do. That's really
yeah,
good advice to start one thing at a time, observe, give it a few days, and probably start at like half the dose you think, even if your provider tells you, like just go slow, low and slow is what we would always be working on and building up. And then you can follow your child's pace. Your child's body can kind of show you the pace that works for them.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really good advice. That's important too.
And then my other question for you that comes up is like, okay, so we have some supplements, they're working, the food part's getting better. That's a slow process for a lot of these kids, like the picky eating and being open to trying new, different foods that are very, healthful. What do you do when it's like time to wean off? Or what is your system or process for, taking kids down off of something that you've ramped up
Right.
on?
Yeah, well, that would depend a lot on the supplement.
Yeah,
So for something like a supplement or a couple things we might be using for constipation, let's say a family doesn't really want to keep using Miralax and they're using natural laxatives, and there's lots of them, we
yeah,
would titrate down. We would say remove half or use it
yep,
every other day and just
yep.
see maybe the child still needs it. You'll find out. Or
Quickly.
maybe they need
Right.
less. Maybe they
Yeah,
will use half the amount and then in a month or so, you can revisit titrating away from that.
yeah,
Something like a lot of kids on the spectrum, kids with ADD features or mood anxiety, they might benefit from these high potency B group vitamins,
yeah.
which can be very, I don't want to say stimulating, or even activating, but they're definitely something you'd want to use in the morning. Don't
Right.
give them to your child in the evening because
Right.
they'll be
Mhm.
awake. Those things are in and out of the body so quickly. So if you want to stop, stop. That's a little different. Sometimes I would have parents come in using really high doses of that stuff. There was a product 20 odd years ago, it was very popular, 30 years ago, going way back, when people first started piecing together that autism is really a medical condition. There's a lot of medical components to it.
Right.
And they were starting to try to tackle that using super high dose pyridoxine and B6 and
Yeah.
magnesium. And that was valid. There was a valid rationale for that, but it can be super activating for some kids.
Especially if that kid crosses over like autism and ADD.
Yeah, yeah.
Then
So
yeah,
that would be one where I would early on, I encountered a lot of parents working with that. They would come in working with that and it would be too much. And I would just say, well, stop, just
right,
stop. And
right.
literally within a day or two, you're going to see, okay, that's better.
Right, right. If it's too much, if it's yeah, for the kid.
Yeah, so it really would matter what is the supplement you're using, what's the background, what's the context. Another one would be iron supplements, which I rarely, thankfully, found parents using. I think most parents understand those can be poisonous and you can't just give your kid big iron doses without supervision. You definitely, that is one thing your pediatrician does understand about nutrition, I would say, to be a little unfair maybe, but they know that iron can be poisonous and they know how to do blood work to see if you need it and how much you might need.
Yeah,
Once in a while, I would see blood work come across with a new family and they're still eating an iron supplement that maybe they were told to use 8 months ago, didn't know
yeah,
they should ever stop. And the child's iron profile is becoming toxic, so I would say stop and
Right.
call your doctor because you
Right.
need more guidance on that.
Right.
That's going to take a while to leave. Iron is slow to build
Or,
and
yeah.
a little longer to leave.
Right. And I think though, for the most part, like as practitioners, it's like we're trying to use the fewest supplements possible
Right.
to move the needle the furthest. And I think of it as like we're going to get this kid to a better place on many levels, whether it's like mitochondrial stress we alleviate, a little detox gets improved, the neurotransmitters are working better, the gut health is better. And then from there, it's like really that should help make the food piece a little bit easier, in terms
Right.
of getting them to try new foods, getting them to include different foods that are important for balance.
Yeah.
Because I think you can't out supplement your way from a poor diet. It's just not going to work,
No, you can't. Or that is so
So
true. You really can't. You can't
right.
just have pills. You
Not
need
going to work.
food.
You need real stuff. Yeah. And it ideally also for like a lot of these kids that we're talking about, like the toxin load is very high for them. So it needs to be organic. It could be local, like whatever it is. You want to pick food that's not covered in chemicals and pesticides and different combinations of chemicals that are never been tested for safety, because that's part of, what goes on in our country as well. And I think local is very important. When you pick food out of the ground, it starts losing nutrition quickly. And we're a very large country, and a lot of our food, on like particularly the East Coast where I'm located, in the winter months, is coming from the West Coast or it's coming from Florida. So this food has to be trucked miles and miles, right? And every day out of the ground before it's eaten, it's losing like a lot of nutrition, particularly things like vitamin C, the more time it spends like in warehouses, on trucks, in distribution centers, finally getting to a shelf where you buy it.
Right.
So I do think as much as possible, organic, local, grow your own gardens if you can figure it out and you have the time or the interest. Get your kids interested. I mean, that's another thing. A lot of these kids are very picky eaters. Get them interested. Let them help start a garden. They might eat something or try something that would blow your
Yes.
mind if they grew it. Started it as a seed, grew it as a plant, or bring them to the supermarket with you and say, hey, you can pick anything you want, but it's got to be from, the perimeter of the market, right? The
Exactly.
fresh
The
section.
outside.
You can't pick anything in the internal, but you pick one thing that you want to try that's brand new, and we will cook it tonight or make it tonight. Or maybe it's, prepared food so that like they know exactly what they have agreed to try, right? It looks exactly like it did, like behind the case. But I think bring them with you. I mean, it can take cooking a little longer. Let them get in there and stir, crack an egg, do different things. They will inherently be more interested.
Yes, that is so true. Data on that. Kids are more likely to eat something they made
Contributed.
or grew or had a hand in, yeah, somehow or
Yeah,
other. And yeah, also the soils are so depleted now, right? So
for
if you
sure. Yeah,
have the capacity to pick up anything grown organically or biodynamically, then it is
right.
going to be more nutritious. There will be more nutrients in that for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the bottom line with supplements is like they're tools. And if you're working with a practitioner, they can be used wisely and they can really help. I think it's just you just want to be conscious of any practitioner that comes at you, with like a huge supplement list or is perhaps, trying to sell a bundled product with that like they're making money on, that's the motivation there. Um, and I do think, I'd say in the last 10 years, the rise of supplements for children has really, like, really taken me off guard. How many brands are geared towards kids? And
Hmm.
ask your clinical medical team, like, which brands do you recommend? I would ask probably a dietitian more than like your pediatrician. I think they have
Yeah,
more insight
pedi
on that.
yeah, pediatricians are in a tough spot. They're not trained in any of this. They're not trained in nutrition or supplements or anything like that. Unless they've personally made it a little mantra of their own.
To learn, right?
They're not gonna tell you. They're not gonna know. So yeah, you would need to go to a naturopath or a functional medicine person who's spent time getting
Studying it.
an IFM certificate or a dietitian nutritionist who knows a little bit about this stuff too, for sure. And I think what's also really important to say about supplements is, like you're saying earlier, Therese, about Americans we're geared toward more is better, more is better. And of course, we're big into medications here. We're pretty
Yeah,
locked into pharmaceuticals here. Certainly see, and probably not unusual, families I worked with would regard a supplement like they would a medication. So, oh, this is a pill for that. This pill for
right.
that problem, pill problem, pill problem. And they're not medications and they don't necessarily work like medications,
Good point.
and they can in very high potencies. A very typical example would be medications for Parkinson's disease to help your dopamine levels. In an ordinary dose, it's not a medication at all, but using it for a disease like that, it's yes, that's FDA controlled as it should be. But don't expect that, let's say your child has pretty big ADD or ADHD, and you're going to go buy a product that says it's made for kids for ADD, and you're going to take it and they're going to get I mean, it might make a little dent, but there's so many drivers of attention and focus. And I mentioned this example because I think that's one category where parents are trying a lot of supplements because they don't
Yeah.
know if they're so sure about going right to medication. I would never suggest that, oh, you can just switch a nutrition supplement for ADD instead of a medication. Because typically, again, that condition has several moving parts in your child. It could include gluten sensitivity. It could include intestinal candida burden, fungal overgrowth. It could include an iron or a zinc deficiency.
Yeah.
There's no pill for that. And that is work to sort, but that's what I used to do in my practice. There are providers who know that and do that. Not your pediatrician, unfortunately. They're trained to give your kid the medication. That's their skill set. Okay, fine, if you need it, whatever. But thinking, oh, can I just go buy this product I'm seeing on Amazon and give that pill instead? Probably not.
Yeah.
The if it works for your kid, great. And maybe it just all your kid needed was a little light touch of a few herbal or nutritional things. But if you're talking about all these other components that really impede attention and focus, they need correcting. Your kid's going to be much happier, much healthier anyway. So,
Right. And all the pathways are connected. If you have mitochondrial stress and you have problems with detox and you have gut dysbiosis, you're going to have to deal with all of them in order to move the needle, on
right,
the condition, which is not going to be typically one thing. It's going to be a
right.
few things, changing the diet. It's going to be a rolled up, protocol.
Mhm.
So I think that's great advice because I think the bottom line is supplements are tools, as we said, and I think they can't replace the fundamentals. Real food,
Nope.
real
Food.
movement. Kids need movement every day. They need deep
Yes.
sleep, they need certain basic things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so critical. And also, we've talked before about microbiome.
Yep.
One thing to also remember, I'll mention about using supplements in kids, if that microbiome is really disrupted, those microbes pretty much eat first. So if you
Fair.
pour a bunch of high potency B vitamins on a microbiome that's really disrupted or has a lot of fungal overgrowth, it's probably gonna have your kid hit the ceiling because those microbes also can use those supplements and
Nutrients, right.
will kind of have a bloom in the wrong direction. So same product might work a lot better after you correct some dysbiosis. So there's all these layers to this. And
Yeah.
it can be overwhelming. Yes, work with a provider who knows how to do this with kids. Yes, they can be helpful. Yes, they can be sketchy, crummy, counterfeit, but don't don't buy them off the internet so much. I also want to say I've used these in infants as well. I've used little tinctures. There are some very nice herbal products that are tinctures, very gentle, made for babies, young toddlers. They usually are formulated in glycerite, not alcohol, and very, very useful. I won't mention brands at all, but those are out there and you can always call that manufacturer. If you see a product that you're interested in, that's an option to just call the manufacturer directly and ask for, not that they're going to give you medical advice, obviously they can't, but guidance on that product. Or even if you're seeing a product you're interested in and it's on Amazon and you're not sure if it's legit there, you can call the manufacturer and say, do you guys sell your product on Amazon? They may say, no, we do not want you to buy from that person.
Yeah.
So there's other ways like that to maybe get a little more info and support.
It's all fair, but I just think the whole thing is buyer beware is kind
For
of the bottom
sure.
line.
Yeah.
Well, this was a good topic. Thank
Yeah,
you
this is
so
an
much as
interesting
always.
one. It's big, it's wide. Parents have lots of questions. These are going up on YouTube anyway
Yes.
for the time being at Judy Converse Nutrition as we kind of develop how we're doing this to race.
Yep,
But yeah, we want to be able to get feedback or questions so people can at least comment there for now, but we'll probably get more of that organized as we go along.
for sure. We're
Yeah,
getting there slowly.
yeah. Okay, cool.
Awesome. All right. Well, everybody, thank you. And we will see you again soon.
See you next time.
Bye.